Well, thank you. Easy to remember, too. I like those kind. So now I have the great pleasure of introducing our guest speaker today, Reverend Blair Tabor. He and his wife Meredith are here. They live in San Diego, and they do travel a lot. His bio is extensive, diverse, and it was on my phone, which I left at home, as I said. And so I got a few high points, and if you do get our emails, please read all the things that Reverend Blair has done in his long career. But to hit a few high points, he has been a Unity minister for 44 years, and he spent many of those years at Unity of San Diego. And also, his music has been a really high point, an important point of his ministry. And he told me that it was just last year that he, and actually his wife Meredith as well, received Unity's Music Award, which is called the Grace Note Award. And so I think that's a wonderful honor to have, and I'm sure it meant a lot to both of you. And they lead travel spiritual opportunities. There are flyers in the back at the table, and you can pick one up, and the next one is next October 2026, where they are doing a Rhine River cruise. So if that interests you, please check it out. I'm sure it'll be fabulous. They do it about every 2 years, so don't miss your opportunity if you can. Also, Meredith has wonderful quilted crafts for sale on the back tables. There are placemats, there are centerpiece tables, there are soup bowl cozies. You name it, she has probably quilted it. And please take a time to just see what she has brought today. So with that, and there's lots more, so please check out your email. Let's give a warm welcome to Reverend Blair Tabor.
Thank you very much. So have you ever been interrupted while you were doing something? No, that never happened to you. Well, that has happened to the rest of us, right? So what did that feel like? What were the feelings that you had when you were interrupted? Annoyed, yeah. What else? Frustrated, yeah. So those stops the momentum, yeah. So we've all had that experience, haven't we? So, and we're not alone. There's actually, as I was preparing for this lesson, I found there's a website called Dads Interrupted. Because we have plans, and then other things happen, don't they? And I remember when our boys were little, we had twins, and they were probably a year or so, maybe even younger. And they had their toys out in the living room. And this voice inside me, I think it was my dad's voice, came out and said, "No toys in the living room." And one of the boys looked at me like, "What is your problem?" And so it's interesting how we have all these different levels to who we think we are and how we experience life and how we think that things are supposed to be, but they never quite work out that way. But many times that's good. Jesus was interrupted many times. In fact, one scholar says 35 times in his ministry he was interrupted. One of the stories is my favorite. This is in Matthew. He had just been with the disciples on the Sea of Galilee, over on the other side from where his family was. And so they come home, and he's already performed some miracles, so everybody's excited, and they're all gathered around him, and there's this big sort of celebration going on. And this dad shows up, interrupts him, and says, "My daughter is ill and dying. Can you come?" So he says yes. So they're walking down the streets, and the streets at that time weren't like the streets that we have. The streets were maybe like 8 feet wide. And so there's this crowd of people. There's Jesus, the disciples, the people who are celebrating, this father is there. they're sort of, going down the street, and then Jesus stops and says, "Somebody touched me." And the disciples go, "Well, look at the crowd of people here. What do you mean somebody touched you?" He says, "No, I felt the Spirit. I felt the energy." One translation says, "I felt the virtue flow out of me." So he stops. And the narration says that a woman who had had a flow of blood for 12 years and could not get any relief from the doctors had thought, if I just touch the hem of his garment, I can be healed. And so she came forward and told her story, and Jesus says, "Daughter, your faith has made you well." So that was the second interruption, right? They were on the way to heal the drowned. So they get to the house, and the girl's already dead. And Jesus said, "I'm here to heal her." And they all laugh. A desperate, very grief-filled laugh. But Jesus sends them all out and says to the daughter, "Get up." She gets up and says, "Give her something to eat." And so here, again, this interruptions led to something good. And so I invite you to think in the same way that just as we all had experiences where people or things have interrupted us, that many times out of those come some of the best things in our lives, some of the best things that can happen to us. And so here's this sort of thing to look at. What if these seeming blockages and interruptions are really opportunities to let God's power flow through you in unexpected ways? In fact, I've come to think of these instead of interruptions as eruptions of spirit. That in the midst of these things that don't seem to go the right way, there's something better in our life. So there's 4 things I invite us to sort of open up to. And again, there may be one that when you hear these things, one that'll really sort of ring true for you. And so that's the one you want to focus on. Don't worry about the rest of them. Get the one. So my acronym for today is AMID, A-M-I-D. So the A stands for anchor in the presence. This is the most important part, to have our time of prayer. It's the 4th unity principle, isn't it? To have that sense. Because there's just one presence, but our mind is going all kinds of different places. And so prayer helps us center in that in a greater way. We sometimes call it a higher vibration. But I like, Paul Tillich talks about God as the ground of our being. And I like to think of like a tree that anchors itself into the soil. Because it can't grow any higher than it grows deeper. And so in the same thing in our life, if we want to have these higher vibration experiences, we have to make sure that we're taking time to grow deeper into that presence of God. To feel in that depth of love, that depth of peace, that depth of joy that is there. The I am prayer that we read earlier talks about, again, no matter what seems that I am there, and to have us to have that sense in a deep and powerful way makes all the difference in the world. And when we have that, whatever happens in life, whatever comes, whatever goes, whatever shows up, whatever disappears, we know that that presence of God is there. And it's working always in our lives. And I like another way to say it is that the divine presence breaks through our darkness. And so when we have that sense of the presence, light, love, joy, all the different aspects of God, it makes all the difference in the world. And when we do have that, then we can live from that. And the circumstances become ways that sort of move us into new expressions of God. And I came up with a sort of, if those of you are familiar with Catherine Ponder, the way that she builds some of her affirmations. So I came up with one similar to that. It goes this way. I bless all people, things, and circumstances. I'm anchored in the present, so I can bless everything, right? So let's say this together. I bless all people, things, and circumstances. Even those ones I know that you may be thinking about. You can bless them too. And now then what she does, sometimes she turns it around. And so this is all people, things, and circumstances bless me. So let's say that together. All people, things, and circumstances bless me. So why? Because I've already blessed them, right? And so now they can bless me. And then I love this third one here. There is nothing to deter me from my good. Now, one of the interesting things is we don't always know what our good is, do we? Sometimes we think we do. We'll talk about that some more. So again, taking time to anchor ourselves in the presence gives us a chance to be that blessing in the world. I love this candle that you have here that shines through the glass. When we have that light, it shines through all the things of life. That blessing is there. So that's the first part, making sure you're taking time daily. And eventually we learn to do it every moment, anchoring ourselves in the presence. So that's the A of amid. The M of mid stands for make your plans permeable to spirit. We have plans, we have goals, we have our lists that we make, right? But make sure there's room in there for God to work as well. There's Proverbs, this is from Proverbs 19. Many are the plans of a person's heart, but it is the Lord's purpose that prevails. So we want to make sure that we have that space in our lives. One of my other favorite Jesus interruption stories is one I remember as a kid going to the Congregational Church. And Jesus, again, early part of his career, the Sadducees and the Pharisees have heard about him, and they're interested in this preacher. And so they come, and they're in this house. And again, think of a house not as the way that we think of our present-day house, much, much smaller. And they're gathered in, they're sitting on the floor, and there's people outside looking in through the doorway. There's probably people sitting out in the street listening to Jesus teaching. And there are 4 men who have a friend who's paralyzed. And they've heard about Jesus being able to heal. So they want to bring their friend to Jesus, but again, they can't get in because there's so many people there. So one of them gets the idea, let's go up on the roof, because they had flat roofs. Let's get up on the roof next door and open the roof and drop him down in the middle. So imagine, here's this, people are gathered around to hear Jesus. All of a sudden, there's 4 sets of footprints on the roof. And not only is there noise, now there starts to be stuff that's falling down because they're breaking through the roof. So, and then they bring him down. And Jesus heals them. But he says to the friends, it's your faith that has made them well. So again, here's this interruption in this seemingly formal situation. But again, it's for have this breakthrough, this eruption of good that comes in life. So whatever plans that we have, recognize that when things don't work out, it doesn't mean that it's being blocked. It means that there's something new that God's introducing that you wouldn't have thought of, that you would not have introduced in your own way. And so I like to put it this way. Spirit has greater good. So whatever plans you have, Spirit has greater good. In fact, there's a prayer form that you write out what you want and say, thank you, God, for this or something better. So we're open to that good in our lives in a great way. During the Depression at Unity Village, they were drilling for water and got oil. So again, not what they wanted, but it was helpful, helpful for their activities that they had. And I love, Rumi puts it this way, without the frown of clouds and lightning, the vines would be burned by the smiling sun. So again, with the clouds, we sort of think as, well, that's blocking the sun. Well, but maybe there's a reason why it's blocking the sun. And so it's opening for us in our lives to see this in a greater way. And so think for a moment about some of the things that sort of seem to interrupt our plans, our goals. Sometimes our history. We said, oh, if I hadn't done that. Or if I'd only done that. But then there was some detour that led to something else, wasn't there? And was there some good in that? Usually, yeah. And so other people sometimes seem to block our good. And again, we can get upset and we can spend all our energy on what's wrong and maybe miss the gift that's in that. You know? And again, circumstances can show up, if only that had been better, only the economy had been better. It's interesting, anytime there's a downturn in the economy, there's some group of people who are making all kinds of money because they look at it in a different way and they see opportunities that are there. And so it's important for us to realize that whatever we think is going to be our good, that we keep open to what God has. Here's another one from the Hebrew Scriptures, from Proverbs. A person's heart plans the way, but God directs our steps. Dwight D. Eisenhower, when he was general, said, planning never works, but it's essential. Because what he found is that, that never worked out, but because you prepared in some way, you had resources marshaled that help you then move ahead and face whatever happened, even if it was different in your life. And so I found sometimes too is that as I set a goal, I see something, oh, that's what I want, and I move towards that goal. But at some point I come past some other barrier and I see something over here and I go, that's really what I want. But I wouldn't have seen that unless I had set that goal first. And so moving towards that, to be open to something else, something greater in your life in a greater way. And what I found is that it's easier for God to redirect me when I'm in motion rather than when I'm sitting still. It's called inertia, right? When you're already in motion, then it's easier for God to move us in something greater in our lives. And so I invite us to think of some of our 12 powers. When I think of will, rather than think of it as my will, I'm willing for God's will of absolute good, which is going to be greater than what my will is, right? So I'm open to that. And then I think of understanding, and I think of illumined understanding. My mind is open to divine ideas. My mind is open to things that I usually wouldn't think of. I want to see something greater. And then imagination. I use creative, visionary imagination. But I'm open to God's possibilities, not just mine. So that's our second part. Make your plans permeable to Spirit. Be open to that. So the next part of amid is interact with what unfolds in a way of blessing. Here's what writer Steve Goodyear said. An unexpected intrusion can be a source of irritation that my agenda was interrupted, or it can quite possibly be the most important thing I encounter that day. Think about some of the best things that have happened in our life. Many of those were not things that we planned. They're things that seem to appear, but they were for our good. And so let's be open to that and to realize that whatever happens, look for the good in it. Look for the good in it. There's a story of a woman, she was at her funeral, her mother's funeral. And it had been a year, she'd spent the last year trying to take care of her mother, trying to keep her healthy. And she had a brother and a sister. The sister had a new baby, so her sister was occupied with that. Her brother had a new girlfriend, and so he was busy with that. So she had given her year to taking care of her mom. She was grateful for that, but now she was sad because all that energy didn't have anywhere to go. So they're in the middle of the funeral. She's feeling, pretty upset, pretty sad. And she hears the door open behind. Someone comes in, so her rushes down the aisle and sits next to her and goes, I'm late. And she looked at him, didn't recognize him. And so another couple minutes into the service, he says, why do they keep calling her Mary? That's not her name. And he finally says, is this a Presbyterian church? He goes, at the wrong funeral. But he stayed. And afterwards, this woman whose mother had died, and he talked, and a year later, they were married. So was he at the wrong funeral? Maybe not. And so it's recognizing that even something that could seem embarrassing, and there it was, it's there for us. And so again, if we have this idea that there's only one presence, one power in the universe, that means nothing can be between us and God's good for us. Because there's only one presence, so nothing can be in the way of that. Reverend Catherine Norman, who's a Unity minister, she and her husband were looking at property up in the San Juan Islands, Norcas Island up there. And they had relatives that had property up there, so they wanted to get, so they found this place that they liked. They made an offer on it. The seller made a verbal agreement to sell to them, but the next day called and said, I'm not going to sell. And they said, what's wrong? And they said, well, let's pray. Well, they prayed. Later that day, got a call from their agent up there, said, I found another property. It was closer to where their friends were up there. It was a better property for them. It was a better price. So the interruption was a divine interruption. It didn't work out the way they thought, but again, Spirit had something else for them in their lives. Here's what Rumi says again. I love this. These pains you feel are messengers. Listen to them. That's the same thing about our body. When our body is in pain, it's not because it doesn't like us. It's because it's trying to communicate to us in the only way it can, trying to get our attention. And so it's recognizing that what unfolds is there for us. There was one of the early holistic physicians, Dr. Irving Oil, said a man came to him one time with a sciatic pain. He'd been to the doctors and everything, and they wanted to do their surgery, but they also said, well, here's the possible things that might happen, and he didn't want to deal with any of those things. So he'd heard about Dr. Oil, so he went to him. And he said, and Dr. Oil, very intuitive, said, well, where's your wallet? He said, well, it's in my back pocket. He said, well, pull it out. His wallet was about that thick. And so they opened it up to look through it, and there was a lot of stuff in there, of course. And what they found, it was like things that he identified with, identification cards and membership cards. And so he said, well, let's just clean that out. He said, and Dr. Oil said, why don't you wear your wallet in the front pocket? And so he says, then come back, in a month. So I come back, and he said, and the guy says, the pain is gone. And Dr. Oil said, well, it's probably because you moved your wallet from the back pocket. He says, no. He says, it has a way to look at, I looked at all the ways that I was identifying myself that weren't serving me anymore. That's what changed it. And so recognizing that the Spirit is there to speak to us in all kinds of ways. There was a man who was president of a company, and they wanted to expand, and they had this idea, and they presented a proposal to another company for services to them. It was going to be a contract worth $1 million. It's going to really move their company into a new experience. So they'd spent time, doing diagrams and all these things, getting ready, made the presentation to the president of the other company. And they said, no, we're not interested at this time. And he was just despondent. And so he's on his way back to the office, and he says, I can't even go back to the office right now. I said, I'm just going to stop. So there's a coffee shop on the way back. He said, I'll just stop and get a cup of coffee. So he gets out of his car, looks at his phone, no service. So he goes in and get his coffee. And the waitress was very friendly, but she leaned a little off. He said, well, what's happened? He said, well, I had a purse that had all of our identification. We moved recently. I had all my kids' birth certificates and everything in it, and $300, and disappeared. And the guy thought, $300, I lost $1 million. He's not real sympathetic. But he gets his coffee. And during the coffee, he gets this voice that says, $300, she's out. He goes, yeah, and he argues in his mind, with his voice. Yeah, but I lost $1 million. So he gets up to pay for his coffee, and the voice says, $300. And so he gave her a $300 tip. And just then, they announced they found the purse. Money wasn't there, but everything else was there. So he goes, well, okay, she's got three. So he gets in his car, still no service. He drives, pulls into the parking lot, into his presidential parking spot, and his secretary runs out of the building, all excited, says, they signed it, they signed it, they signed it. He says, what? He says, yeah, the company that you went to, they changed their mind. They faxed it over. It's all signed. So he went to look, and the date and time on the fax were the same as the date and time on the receipt where he'd done $300 tip. So there's always these opportunities that are there for us to move in a greater way in our lives. When our Unity Church in San Diego, we had one of our ladies who worked back in the kitchen, one of our volunteers, and her favorite line was, I'm too blessed to be stressed. And I just love that. I'm too blessed to be stressed. And even when things don't go the way that we want, to know that there is still this presence of blessing that's there for us in our lives. And so one of the ways I think of it is this, that I'm walking around minding my own business, and I'm invited into God's business. So interact with what unfolds in a way of blessing. So anchor in the presence, make your plans permeable to spirit, interact with what unfolds as a blessing. And then the D of amid is derive new directions. So if God is ever present, and I love that in your statement you have omnipresence instead of omnipresent. So we're not saying that God is something that is omnipresent, but is the omnipresence, that very presence that's there. And it helps us enter into that experience and understanding. So whatever seems to be sneaking up on you, it's your good. Your good is there. It's working in your lives in greater ways. Years ago, I was doing a lesson at Unity in Thousand Oaks, and the title was, No Normal for Me, Please. And I got a call Saturday night from them because they shared space with a theater group. And they said, you can't believe the stage is set up to look like an underwater garden. I go, perfect. No normal for me, please. And it's just being open to that in wonderful, wonderful ways. When I was at the church in Merced, we had a lady who would call every month. And it was one of those calls where, you're listening, and then you're listing. It's like you're just getting drained listening to this person about half an hour each time she'd call. And this happened several times. And one day in prayer, I said, all right, God, I'm obviously not doing her any good. It's not doing me any good. What do you got for me? And Spirit said, you have nothing for her, but I am everything that she needs. Next time she calls, just imagine that you're sending my Spirit through the phone. So guess who called later that day? And as she talked, I let go. And I just let Spirit. And after about 5 minutes, she goes, oh, I feel so much better. Thank you. Yeah, and it changed everything because, again, there's a connection. There's always a connection. And so we trust that in our lives. And to realize that when Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life, what he's saying is the I am is the way. The I am is the way. The I am is the truth. The I am is the life. And to recognize that whatever is going on, Spirit is there for us. Spirit is there as us, moving us into greater good in our lives. So let's sort of look at this again. Anchor in the presence. So who were you that said, oh yeah, that's what I need to be? Okay. How about make your plans permeable to Spirit? Who did that resonate with? Okay. How about interact with what unfolds in a way of blessing? Does that, okay. And then derive new directions. Yeah, so here we are. There's something that Spirit has for each of us in this. And again, thinking this as not divine interruptions, but divine eruptions. The Spirit has a way of breaking through. And so what is present? The fullness of God. To what am I present? Am I present to that, or am I present to, I'm bothered by this didn't work out the way. I forgot my phone at home. When I speak now, I leave my phone in the motorhome, so I don't have to worry about did I turn it off, because I don't need it right now. I'm here right now. And so we recognize that divine presence, that divine blessing is there with us. So with that, let's go take time in meditation. So I invite you to close your eyes. Oh, that'd be wonderful, Guy. Thank you. So I invite you to close your eyes. And let's just have this sense of Spirit. And not even that we're going to take a breath of Spirit, but it's Spirit breathing us. As we breathe out, God is breathing in. As we breathe in, God is breathing out. There's just oneness that is ours. And anchoring in the presence, anchoring into, feeling the roots of our being rooted in that divine life, that divine love. There's a wonderful unit phrase that says, nothing can disturb the calm peace of my soul. That I am presence, that I am. When we say I am, we align ourselves. We sang about it earlier. I am peace, I am light, I am love. And with that, we know that whatever is revealed, whatever shows up, Spirit is guiding us to life, to wholeness, to blessing, to new beginnings, to something greater. So breathe deeper into the presence. Thank you, sweet Spirit, for always being with us, always revealing to us the greater good. We look for